Well, hello, and thank you for joining us today. Just going to go and open up with a brief announcement. This is a little different for us, and my family is quarantined for a little while, and so as part of that, the sermon was already ready. The everything's been finished, and we said, "Look, we'll record. We have the ability, the technology to do that. We'll record the lesson and share it that way." So for those of you who are in the auditorium, it would be an honor to be there with you. For those of you who are at home, thank you for joining with us today. I will share that my family is doing fairly well, but we do covet your prayers. Thank you for that. Now, as we go ahead and get into our lesson for today, I picked this shirt out, and you really can't see it too well. The camera's a little too squatty, and I'm not far enough back, but it is Go, Love, Serve. I don't really remember where this shirt came from, but the message is a message that I really appreciate. The idea that a person is to go and to love and to serve, and it seems to follow that order. As we think about that idea, and we're coming to our text today, Luke chapter 10, verse 25 and following. This is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And so as we're coming to this set of text, and again, that's Luke chapter 10, verse 25, in preparation, I asked a question this past week on Facebook and had several of you reply. Thank you for your replies. But the question was, tell me about a time when you were helped, when someone stepped out of their way and gave you a hand. And the beauty was the people that responded. I don't remember offhand now how many people replied, but we had several people, and some of the stories were incredible stories to be had. Some of them were stories that I remember. I've known of people around in other parts of the country, and some of them were stories I never heard. I think of Russell Phelps shared one about when they were adopting Anna, and the way that the church just showered he and Amber with gifts and money and ways to make that a reality, and how deeply that impacted him, that when asked the question, how is someone helping you? That's the one that he brought up. Lindsay Hankins shares one that I thought was beautiful, and she talked about a struggle that her and her family were in with bankruptcy, and how she had spent an entire day or a couple of days preparing for the Christmas dinner. And yet again, that's a volunteer. She's doing that because she loves you, she loves the Lord. But yet in that moment, she goes home after an exhausting day, and there is a goodie bag with some various items and some money in it. And she said it was totally unexpected, but totally appreciated. I look at the stories, and I would encourage you, go to my Facebook page. I think it should be open, but I don't think I have anything set where you can't go see it. But I would encourage you to go read some of the positive comments that people have shared, ways that people have been good to them. But the question on being good to somebody, the follow-up that I had was, how did that make you feel? I've learned that people will retain knowledge. I mean, we can do tricks, we can create songs, we can do all sorts of stuff for people to retain knowledge. The knowledge part isn't the struggle. The thing that people don't forget are feelings. The way someone made you feel, the way that someone looked at you or helped you or assisted you, and the way that it made you feel. When we come to the parable today, and this is yet again the parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke chapter 10, verse 25 and following, I want you to think about a time when someone helped you. And I want you to hold that memory right now, but I want you to think not necessarily of the event, but how did that event make you feel? Now, as we move into the actual parable today, we're introduced first off to a lawyer who, and this is in verse 25 on the occasion, he said he wants to test Jesus. And so I see that the question is asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? That's a great question. I mean, is that a question that you would have? I mean, we have our answers, I'm sure, but if you had Jesus right in front of you, what would the question be that you'd want to ask? And this guy, I think to some degree, is wanting to ask a very legitimate question. However, he is also, I hate to call him a con artist, but he's a con here. We're told that he has the intent to test Jesus. He knows the law, and that's what Jesus' reply is he says, you're professional. You're a professional in the law. You should know. And Jesus answers with two comments, Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 6 and Leviticus 19 and verse 18. And so as Jesus replies, how do you read in this? Verse 27, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. The two great commands that we would know, I think, fairly well. If you have been any form of a practicing Christian, those are two commands that you have probably heard. And if you haven't, then now you have, and I would put those to memory. But those are the two great commands. If you love God and you love other people, then everything else in the law wraps up into those two things. So the next phrase comes up is that the lawyer wishes to justify himself. And so he asks the question, who is my neighbor? Now, boy, that's a good question. Because I could tell you that at my home, which I'm recording in, I've got a neighbor, let's see, south, east, and west of me. I have trees north of me. I know if you go far enough north, there's a neighbor, but I'm not going to go through the trees, at least not yet. But we have physical neighbors that are near us. So what was this lawyer asking? Do you think the lawyer was confused on who the neighbor was? Do you think he was asking because he somehow felt that maybe Jesus would have a more insightful answer? You see, what I'm going to believe is that the lawyer is asking that question because he wants Jesus to give the reply that he wants to hear. The lawyer would have been trained in such a way that would have said the Jew is always first, and so the only true neighbor that I have is a fellow Jew. That is the person who is my neighbor, and I should have no responsibility towards anybody else. And if I do, the responsibility comes because they've become a proselyte. Beyond that, I should really step back and let them be themselves. That's the answer that the Samaritan, or that the lawyer was wanting. But what was the answer that Jesus gave him? Instead of giving him a direct answer, he goes off and tells this parable. A man was going down from Jerusalem, leaving the worship that would have been taking place in Jerusalem, probably returning to his home. So I'm going to assume that he's a devout Jew. I'm going to assume that he is practicing his religion and that he is heading home. And it says he falls among thieves and robbers. There are two people that pass. The first is a priest, and then the second is the Levite. They pass by, they see the man injured, laying beaten on the side of the road, and they walk around as to avoid him. I'm perplexed in this parable because what do they play? What role do they play in this account? Mind you, Jesus is making this story up. It's not like it's a live account. It's not a real account. Jesus is making this up. And as he's making this up, why include a Pharisee? Why include a Levite and a priest? They're not necessarily needed. Why even include a Samaritan? Why not just say that a person was walking by, saw the need and filled the need, and it doesn't really matter who they were or what their background was? But I think Jesus was pointing this lawyer and maybe pointing us to a darker reality, that we tend to look at our neighbor as people who probably look like us, who probably act like us, That if my neighbor was, let's say, Hispanic, maybe I have less of a responsibility to them because, well, there's the cultural norms, there's the language barrier, you could go down the list of things that I might make up for why a person of a different ethnicity doesn't deserve my neighborship. And as I see what Jesus does to this story, in asking that question, why does he assign a socioeconomic status? I think he does it so that we'll put ourselves in the story. If the hero was instantly mentioned and we knew who he was, that we didn't even know he's a Samaritan, he's just some guy, he's the hero, then it would be very easy for us to put ourselves in as the hero and never experience what Jesus was trying to say, what he was trying to teach the lawyer. But because Jesus put a demographic in here, we see, maybe we even can see ourselves. Who are we? Is there a person in your life that if you saw on the side of the road, you might change lanes to get away from them? And I'm not talking courtesy of trying to give them a little bit of space. That maybe if you saw someone in need, instead of going to them, maybe you would flee from them. I think that's what Jesus is trying to show us, is that we should feel somewhat disappointed by their actions, by their position. And these are two men who are devoutly religious. I mean, you have a priest and a Levite. These are the guys that they know the law. They know how they should act. But yet, they don't. Is it possible that maybe those of us who know how we should act fail to meet what we're called to act to? What I notice as I move a little further into this is I'm reminded of a verse, Titus chapter 1, verse 16. They claim to know God, but by their actions they deny him. They are detestable, disobedient, and unfit for doing anything good. By claiming to know God, but their actions deny him. The second, I guess it's probably the third. We kind of talked about the context. We've talked about the priest and Levite. My third thought here is, why Samaritan? What does the Samaritan gain in this story that he needs to gain? Mind you, if you go back in chapter 9, Jesus is traveling through Samaria and he sends some disciples ahead saying, find me a place to rest. And they're not welcomed. So prior to this, and we're talking a matter of just a few days, if that Jesus was denied admission into Samaria or was denied hospitality in Samaria. So does that have any factor in this, that Jesus is looking to a Samaritan now? Does it have any maybe weight that the lawyer would have despised the Samaritans? That they would have been maybe the ostracized community in their day. And by doing this, by listing a Samaritan as the one who is the hero of the story, I think Jesus is showing us that it does not matter where someone comes from. Doing the first and the second commandment, the great commandments, is not a matter of training or schooling, but is a matter of the heart. It's a matter of where their heart was and who they truly loved. You see, the Jews hated the Samaritan. We know this in John chapter 4, when Jesus is talking with the woman at the well. There's this comment, and this is verse 9, at the very end of the verse. It says, "For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." I think there are multiple reasons that we could pinpoint for a Samaritan not to stop and help this injured man. But the point is that it's only the half-breed, the renegade Samaritan, that actually does the helping. It says that he bandaged the man's wounds. He put ointment on them. He took them to the nearest town. He paid for a room at the inn. And he said, if there's something else that I owe, put it on my tab, and I'll pay it when I come through again. I asked a question at the very beginning. Tell me about a time when you were helped. A time when someone stepped out of their way and helped you. And then more so, how did that make you feel? I would be within my right to preach this text and to say, well, now the point is that you ought to help people. You have the obligation to go and to go love and serve, as this church says. You have that responsibility. And it would be within my right to say those things because the text says it. I mean, we are called to be neighbors to the people who we might not even want to consider our neighbors. We have that responsibility. But I don't think that's the point that Jesus is trying to reach at. You see, obedience to the law is just that. It's obedience. But the law wasn't written so that we would just obey, so that we would just oblige to what God says and then at the end say, well, I did it all right. The point of the law is to change hearts. And so when we look at a moment like this, I believe that the intent of Jesus' message is not necessarily to tell the lawyer how he ought to act, but is telling the lawyer how he ought to feel. That he should look upon people with compassion. Matthew chapter 25, verse 31, I was naked and you clothed me, hungry and you fed me, thirsty and you gave me something to drink, sick and in prison, sick and you prisoned, and you visited me. This is found in Luke chapter 10, verse 33, when it says that the Samaritan took pity on the man. If I only help because I feel obligated, that I am looking for the person who has to be my neighbor. But if I help because I feel, or because I have felt trapped, because I have felt as if I could not do, as if I felt helpless, if I help because I can share the feeling of being alone with the person, if I help because I understand where that person's been, I believe then I have compassion. And then I'm fulfilling the great command, not because of obligation, but because I understand the feelings. You know, this carries one further step, really. The gospel portrays this exact message. Romans chapter 5, verse 8, God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. What I see the gospel saying is that Jesus was the Samaritan walking on the side of the road. The world killed him. The world could not accept his quality. But he walked by the side of the road and he saw us. He saw us laying there, beaten, alone, sick, gasping for air. And instead of walking on, the gospel message is that Jesus picks us up, that Jesus bandages our wounds, that he carries us to the foot of the cross and says, I'm going to leave you here, but I'm going to go pay the bill, and if there's something else, I'll take care of it. That's the gospel message. So the question ends, how can you pass on that feeling? How can you share that emotion, that feeling with someone else?